welcome to the Push-Pull Sales and Marketing Podcast. I'm Marcello.
And I'm Sherry, and each episode will provide you with sales and marketing strategies that you can implement immediately into your own business. Our sponsor for today's episode is Blinkist, and we're going to be talking about establishing yourself as an expert. I think that was a big reason why we started this podcast, was to put ourselves out there a little bit more and share some of the knowledge that we've gained through our jobs and through life experience, and share that with you guys. And not just to pass that knowledge along, but also to kind of put ourselves out there and make people understand that we do know what we're talking about to some extent in a world that's full of people who are just kind of spewing nonsense or pretending, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, in today's day and age, it's a lot easier for someone who might not know anything to broadcast that out or to develop an audience without knowing pretty much anything or without being an established expert in the field. So there are a lot of quote-unquote, I think you wrote down the word, fakers.
Yeah, I mean, we see it on our Facebook news feeds and all the time, you know, that everybody has an e-course, everybody has a training, everybody has, you know, this, that, or the other thing. And are there really that many Instagram experts in the world? And if you really do your research, when you look behind these consultants or, groups, you know, there's a consulting group that I came across on Instagram, and you know, it's a really small following, and it's always hard to know. Is this somebody that just switched from something else and is starting up again, which is why their following isn't huge right now? Or are they really putting the focus on their customers and actually making the money? You know, I think that's the other disparity we see. There are some really legitimate marketing groups or even sales training groups that might not have a huge social following, but they are very successful and they're making a lot of money and they really do know what they're talking about. Whereas we see other people that might be Instagram famous and have a huge following, and that's kind of the depth of their experience. So it's tough as a consumer to know where to put your trust, or if you're looking for some consulting or training, you know, it's hard to know who to pay that money, which is why if you are running your own business, or even as a salesperson, you know, if you're working on commission, it's so important to put yourself out there and start generating the content so that people understand that you do know what you're talking about. I think it's a little bit different, and I think video has become so popular because it's so transparent, and there's nobody else that can sit in front of a camera or in front of Facebook Live and be you. Whereas if you're writing blog posts, somebody else technically could be ghostwriting for you. So I think it adds another layer of transparency. Even podcasting, you know that it's my voice, you know that it's Marcella's voice, you know that we're speaking to you. And while I write all of our own blog posts, I have ghostwritten for other people. So that becomes even a little bit more tricky in that regard. But I don't know. What do you think?
What do you? I mean, if you just want to just dive right into it, we do have some basic outlines how to establish yourself as an expert, and talk about a little bit more what are some of the quote unquote steps, or what are some ideas that you can utilize. One of the first things, and to kind of separate yourself from these quote unquote fakers out there and to make yourself more authentic, you were right, podcast. If you blog yourself, if you do Facebook video, in what media?
And this was a big part too of why we chose. Just recently, we started doing Instagram videos, and I wanted to make that point because before we were putting up, some inspirational graphics or quotes from ourselves or quotes from other people, and they looked nice and they looked pretty, but it wasn't adding that personal touch. Being able to see our faces, see us being passionate about what we're talking about, answering your questions, adds another level of realism. And that's what you would be getting. If you work with me, that's what you're going to be getting. And I think that's really helpful and really an important step. And yes, it takes a little bit more effort to go that extra mile, but video can really help you in that. But yeah, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No.
At Push Pull Sales on Instagram, by the way.
Yes, and it does take a little bit extra time. You spent a little bit more time getting the lighting right, getting the sound right, getting everything right, makeup and all that good stuff.
Yeah, well, and that being said, even so, like, something that's really helpful, and I was just talking with someone else about this that was looking for help with video, working in batch, like trying to do a whole bunch of a similar task at the same time really is going to help you save time. So, Instagram video is only 1 minute. Instead of us sitting down twice a week to record a 1 minute video, we set up the scene, set up the camera, had everything ready to go, and we recorded 26 videos, for Instagram in less than an hour. Between the two of us. And then I can just upload them to Instagram whenever we're ready to post them. So things like that, it doesn't have to be a huge daunting task. That was an hour that was worthwhile for us. But what was the point you were getting to?
Oh, in terms of using video and appearance and stuff like that. What I was going to transition into was talking about, and you have a valid point, if you do everything in the same scenery, in the same kind of setting, that's also very helpful because you're kind of establishing a set presence and a set and actually a set voice and actually a set tone of what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Appearance is extremely, extremely important. If you want to attract a certain audience, you need to come across as a professional. You need to come across as an expert. Now, some fields are a little bit more informal. A lot of our target audience is more so, I would say, formal at this point. Yeah,
when I would walk into, like the WordPress conference or something like that, the WordCamp conference that I spoke at a little while ago, when I walked into those prep meetings or those speaker get-togethers, it's everybody just in jeans and t-shirts. It was a lot of developers, a lot of coders, and then on the user side of things, I was more used to having more that B2B relationship and needing to look a little more professional. So it's interesting when you step into that, I don't think overdressing is ever necessarily a terrible thing, but you do want to fit in, you do want to know your audience, just like with everything else. I feel like we preach that a lot. So I think appearance is important, but I think even more than that, it's having the experience to back it up. And it's hard when you're first starting out. And it's the same kind of complaint that's like, how can I get an entry-level job when every entry-level job requires 2 to 3 years experience and no one will give me that job to get that experience. I feel like it's a similar kind of thing, even if you switch careers, and it's tough to build up that experience to be able to present yourself as an expert. And I think you want to shift that a little bit. You don't need to wait for anybody to give you that permission or give you that shot. There's always things currently that you can start on your own and start building and start learning. If you want to be a writer, start your blog or start writing on Medium or whatever it may be. Start putting yourself out there, start putting your ideas out there. And I think you can phrase it a little bit differently. If you're just starting out, you're not going to be going around telling people the right way to do everything, or telling them, that you should be doing X, Y, Z. You're going to start out saying, here's what worked for me, or here's what I'm noticing, or based on X, Y, and Z, this is the conclusion that I came to. And I think that's kind of a good rule of thumb for anything, because, I tell people that have taken my blogging course that even though there's so much out there, there's so much content flowing around, telling people something based on your personal experience is always a welcome change, because you don't know, we can be told the same thing 5 times in 5 different ways, and maybe only one of those ways is really going to get through to us. Marshall is shaking his head in agreement.
Yeah, I'm definitely agreeing with. And part of the nice thing too, and again, in terms of establishing yourself as an expert, part of that is getting content out there. So to have enough content in enough different forms, and people can see in the beginning what that evolution is. So if someone follows you from the beginning and kind of been listening for a couple of years, listening for a couple months, they can see that evolution in you. And a lot of people that are just coming on board now, the nice thing is they might only be seeing your recent content where you really are an established expert. So at any point, you're going to need to put in the time. You're going to need to put in the time outside of whatever medium you're using to kind of broadcast, hey, I'm an expert, or hey, I know this. But
doing it.
You need to walk the walk, and you need to talk the talk and walk the walk. That's
And I think the flip side of that, when you said they'll see your how you're changing over time. The other interesting point that I think a lot of times we forget about is that there's always going to be people starting off from the beginning in their own journey. So maybe you're an expert of helping people through their first year as a salesman. Maybe you are an expert in helping the guy who's been in sales for 10 years make that leap to the next step, or get him motivated again, or get him excited about sales again. There's a lot of different levels, and I think as we progress in our journey, we tend to forget that people are always starting field, and what we've learned over the last 5-10 years is extremely valuable to someone who's just starting out. But the way we're going to talk to them, and the type of information that we're going to give them is, of course, different. There's always going to be people above you and below you.
Absolutely, and it's definitely a good idea to, as you're going along, or as you're whatever you're trying to establish yourself as an expert on, to really find your target market. So you don't want to go really, really, really broad. So, for example, you got the guy
can't
from
be an expert in everything.
Exactly. So you got a guy who is an expert on, let's say, real estate, and maybe that's valuable for him to sell to other real estate agents. But if you're just a real estate agent yourself, you don't necessarily need to establish yourself as the all-knowing, I know everything about real estate and bringing in leads and stuff like that. Maybe you just need to be the expert on
your local community,
fixer-upper, stuff like that, knowing where everything actually is. Or if you're in the mortgage industry, knowing whatever trends or whatever is applicable to your state. You don't necessarily need to have a quote-unquote national voice, because you can have 6 million people see something and maybe only 6 people are an actual prospect for you, whereas it's better to have 1,000 people see it and 10 people are going to be a better fit for whatever product or for whatever service you have.
Yeah. And it's a lot less daunting for people to become an expert in a smaller area or a smaller niche, because you don't need those huge numbers. And a lot of times those huge numbers aren't converting to anything. So if you are going to be, the realtor that we use to buy our current house, he was an expert in this particular town that we wanted to move into. And he pretty much knew everybody who lived here. He had sold houses to most of them. He knew what was going on the market, what was coming off. He knew the backstory to why this was the way it was, and he was very transparent about that. Of course, he was knowledgeable in everything that you would expect your real estate agent to be knowledgeable in, as far as financial and even just the condition of the house. But what really set him apart was that he knew this town, and that's a lot more doable for him. He wasn't out there posting national blog posts hoping to generate traffic from California. He was just focused here on his town, on his current customers, on referrals. And
he knew every neighbor. He knew every neighborhood who used to live there before. He knew reasons why you should buy a house that maybe other people didn't know, or also why you shouldn't. Because sometimes when you're looking at the listing, or you look at everything else, there are some other factors that without having that expertise.
You guys know who lived here, right? And it was a guy who had been jailed for pedophilia stuff.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, oh nope, we didn't know that. That's good information to have.
Or to be like, hey, this area here, this is actually a lot more renters, quote unquote. So it's not necessarily as many homeowners and stuff like that. People don't take as good care of the property. So you might want to look into this area here. Whereas with the information that you have available, so he knew what the neighborhood was like, and things that you wouldn't see on paper, or things you wouldn't see without having that presence and without putting in the time in that area to kind of figure those things out. So one of our overall tips, we has established, you want to get your voice out in a couple different mediums. So blogs, podcasts, stuff like that. You want to establish a certain area of expertise, and you want to focus on that. One great way to do this, and we talked about this in terms of doing a company blog in a previous podcast, think about what questions you can legitimately answer, or where you have that expertise, or what your customers might ask. Because it's kind of funny too, is sometimes if you research something and you might ask Google a question, you're like, wow, I don't have any really good answer. Your answer and your knowledge might be the best answer for that question. A lot of times, like for me personally and for our company blog, what P&G Logistics will do is, we'll think of a question a customer will ask. We'll type that question into Google, or we'll type that topic into Google, and a lot of the times it's not listed there. So we'll actually go ahead and write up an article, or actually write up a blog about that. And what we found is relatively quickly we can establish ourselves as a top rank for that phrase. And the more technical or the more knowledgeable you're going to need to be in that industry, the better it is. So yeah, there might only be 1,000 people every month on Google searching for that term, but to be number one in that versus someone who's looking for, how can I get a price on a boat in San Diego? It's going to be a lot better to say, okay, I'm looking to upgrade from a, whatever 450 horsepower to 550 horsepower. What are the pros and cons? So then you're more of an expert. It's not just about price. It's more about, okay, this person knows what they're talking about. So the more technical questions you can answer, the more time you put in, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And making sure that relates back to it. I mean, if you're bringing in customers that are asking those questions already, it's a lot more linear to then convert them to the sale. So like you said, you can prove yourself if you want to, establish yourself as more of a personal brand, or if you have a company that you're trying to promote, you can start the podcast, you can blog, you can kind of like microblog on any of the social media platforms. You can put yourself out there and offer freebies. Maybe they're white papers or ebooks, something like that you can offer and get your message across. Maybe you start, a YouTube show or Facebook Live kind of shows, almost. And there's a lot of options in that regard. But another, probably an easier way to break into that and to get your message out there and in front of more people and really establish yourself is doing it for somebody else. So whether it's going on Haro.com, which stands for Help a Reporter Out, they always send out queries of really, really specific experts that they're looking for to write articles. So journalists go on there and they have an article they're trying to write and they need an expert to quote or interview. You can simply respond back to those email queries with your answer. And a lot of times, if you do it quickly enough, you're going to get featured either in smaller websites or even major publications. And it's a great way to get your name out there and, get places like maybe you'll get CNN attached to your name, or say that you've been featured on there. Which is a fantastic way to go about it. And even on the smaller things, if there's a podcast in your industry, more than likely you can be a guest on that podcast. Or if there's a blog that that your audience reads a lot of the time, see if you can do a guest post or at least contribute to something they're doing, as a quote from an expert.
And that can also work both ways too. So you can help a reporter out's great. And then talk about going on other podcasts, bringing other people on to your podcast, or bringing other people into your medium. So if you have, let's say you're a mortgage guy and you bring in a real estate guy to talk about your stuff, you're going to share audiences. And if you collaborate that way, you're also going to grow your following. You're going to be seen more as an expert, because again, you're not just in one necessary funnel. So you're not in your own funnel anymore. You're not in your own audience. You're giving a new audience a chance to hear you out. And likewise, if you bring in experts too and asking questions and bringing in other people, bringing in value to them, that in turn makes you more valuable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That was, a big reason why we started accepting guests here. Part of it is, it's just tough to generate a ton of content. Marcella and I ourselves, we have a lot of ideas, we have a lot to say, but at some point it's fun to hear a fresh perspective, maybe a little bit different perspective, and that goes back to, it might hit home for you guys if you hear someone else say a similar thing, or a little bit of a twist on something. And that being said, I did just recently put up a form on pushpullsales.com. If you are interested in being a guest on our podcast, you are welcome to fill out that application, and that'll go into, I'll get the whole sheet of who has applied and all of your information. And when a spot opens up, or if we feel like you'd be a really good fit, we'll be in touch. So there's an opportunity for that as well. The other point is, when you're establishing yourself as an expert, a lot of times when we're living in a particular world and we're doing a ton of that research and we're kind of sucked into our own bubble, we stop, we don't remember to bring our own spin to it. If I'm looking up, okay, I want to start a podcast and I'm reading all these articles, this is the way to do it. This is the right way to do things. You want to do X, Y, Z. And you get caught up in that and you start forgetting to take the time to brainstorm your own ideas. Maybe you do have a better way to do things. In your particular industry, when you're running your business, there's some set rules in place with any company, with any industry, but there's always flexibility. If your goal is to get more customers, maybe there's a better way to do that. If your goal is to, come up with a better product, obviously that's a more creative process, and there's different ways of doing things than what you've done in the past. So don't forget to bring that personal flair to it, because if you're too dry and too boring, it doesn't matter what your experience is if people don't want to listen to you.
Thinking in terms of what you're talking about, so putting your own spin on things too. Sometimes you also do the opposite. You will forget to credit sources and talk about where you got the information. For me personally, growing up wrestling as an example, if someone told me, "Hey, do this and this is going to work," that's fine for me. I don't need any other background information. If someone tells me something in terms of selling, if you do this, this is going to work, I will do it. I will try it. A lot of times, especially in training salespeople or in any industry, people need to know the why. They need the background reason in terms of why that works. Well, this move will work because it takes them off balance and you're going to get leverage this way. Or the reason why this sales technique works is because people will actually shift their brain and it'll actually light up the emotional side and not the rational side. The emotional side actually decide that it's going to be more inclined to make a yes decision, whatever that is. So sometimes people are going to need facts and figures, and actually I'm training a couple of new sales reps, and I almost forgot too to say, it's not just, hey, this is my opinion, this is the data behind it, to kind of give an example, because some people, they might have their own spin on things, but without having that background research, or without having the actual data, or have information elsewhere, it's more of a, okay, and why should I believe you?
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. And even if you can't, at first when you started that, I thought you were going to say, citing your source, you should know, a lot of times we read and we research so much that we're not sure where that concept came from or where whatever. But when you said, explaining the why behind it, always makes a lot of sense. And maybe the why behind it is your personal experience. I worked with this business and this was their goal and this was their current state and this is what worked for them. Maybe it is, I was researching this topic and from what I gathered, this seems to be the best course of action, which, also points to, regardless of where you're at, regardless of whether or not you're a quote unquote expert in your field, the top people are always reading more, learning more, watching more, listening more. They're always gathering more information that's going to help them personally, but that they can also share with the people coming up behind them. Which is why we chose to have Blinkist for the sponsor for this episode, because it's I was going to say platform, but it's a service that basically condenses books into 15-minute reads. Do you want to explain?
Yeah, so basically Blinkist has 3 separate platforms. One, I believe it will curate one book. All the books are actually nonfiction. And what it'll do is it'll take basically all the main points, all the main topics, and really condense it down into a short read. There's a premium and there's also a plus version. So the premium gives you unlimited access. You can go and pick any book you want. It'll actually give you the summary of and also talk about learning. Their library is also growing too. So a lot of business books, a lot of psychology books, a lot of marketing books, stuff like that. You're going to have that available. And lastly, there's a higher level version which will actually read the already abbreviated summary for you. So for the really, really busy people or for the people on the go, you can basically, instead of taking 3 hours to read a book to get the 5 nuggets of information in there, you can get that in 15 minutes. So if you go over to pushpullsales.com/quickread, you can check it out. You can also set up a free trial over there. But yeah, it helps out the show. We definitely appreciate it. One other thing I wanted to kind of segue into too is when we talked about finding a certain target or finding an area where you can be the expert to narrow that down. That's always helpful. You also, in that same vein, you want to follow the path of least resistance as well. So there might be some areas where you can answer questions where other people aren't. So that'll help you rank higher on Google. So there's LinkedIn Answers, there's Yahoo. I'm not sure actually Yahoo Answers it might have shut down, but just to give you an example, I would go in Yahoo Answers when that was very popular and answer questions that were relative either to insurance. When I was selling insurance, when I was in the home improvement industry, I would look and I would research and see what other people were also talking about. So that'll also help as well, especially nowadays, because that was back 9-10 years ago. People weren't as inclined to Google people. Now I will Google every single person I almost bump into, or any person who's going to give me a quote, and it's very helpful to see, okay, hey, this is this person on his own company's website, but here's him answering a question on LinkedIn Answers, or here's him answering a question on Quora, and here's a link to his blog. So having content across multiple platforms and platforms that it's not as hard to get your name in there. Answers.com, I think,
that's
is another
an interesting point, too, because if you might not have the time right now to build up a personal brand from scratch. You might not have a reason to have your own website or, your own whatever it might be. But there's no excuse. You can take the 5 minutes to go run through Answers.com or whatever and answer a couple questions. So yeah, I think, and you're right, those do show up on Google if somebody searches your name, and if you're answering things politely and a well thought out response. Actually, some of my most recommended stuff on Medium was actually comments, replies that I wrote to somebody else's article, because it still lists that under your profile. And if you write a really well thought out response, or whether it's agreeing or disagreeing or offering a different perspective, I do think there's value in that. Yeah.
Another thing you want to do, and we talked about some of those resources like Harrow and all that good stuff, you also want to network. So you want to keep track of anyone who has either referred you, or you want to keep in touch with any medium that you've actually been on. So for example, for me and for my company, I had one reporter who wrote an article about, I think it was people who spectacularly flopped their interview or something like that. That was the same person who had reached out to me before specifically about careers.
For the record, you didn't flop the interview. You were interviewing someone that flopped.
Correct. So it was actually stories of that. But that same person had found me before because they had asked my expertise on careers in supply chain management, and that actually had come across multiple different platforms. And I had reached out and said, hey, thank you so much. I saw the article had went on. I know I really, really appreciate that. So a couple weeks, couple months, whatever it was in between, when the other opportunity came up, they say, hey, do you have a story about this? So you want to manage any sort of contacts or any sort of people who also are helping amplify your voice and helping get your name out there the same way you would for any sort of prospect or any sort of customer. You want to keep that relationship. You want to have a way to maintain that and maybe have a set method to follow up or maybe a way to keep in touch. Easy way to do it is LinkedIn, just that way you have it. And you can also keep up to date too if they go move to a different site or if they move to a different source. So someone who might be, let's say...
I run into that with editors a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
That people are just always shifting. I mean, my contact at a website or at a magazine changes very frequently, and I'm always getting the emails bouncing back that so and so doesn't work here anymore. So if it's an important contact, you need to make sure you stay on top of things. Or get their personal email. There's contacts that I've had that she's like, hey, I'm switching companies. I would love to possibly work with you for this new company that I'm switching to. Here's my personal email address. So yeah,
does that
I think that pretty much wraps us up. What do you think?
I think so.
Prove yourself as an expert. Put yourself out there. Let your audience know that you're not just BSing them and you're not throwing. I'm just picturing like the people, I live on a yacht or have a yacht and a beautiful 15 bedroom house and that I rented for the day. You take all the money out of your bank account
and show that and say, hey, this is what I made in this and I got rich quick and all that good stuff.
Yeah, we're not talking about all of that, and I know everybody can see through that. I just don't know how they still exist. Some people must still be buying in.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's an audience. There's definitely an audience for that.
So if there's an audience for that, there's an audience for you, and you can feel better about that once you establish yourself. And what were you going to say?
I was going to say my actual last tip is to be patient.
Yeah.
You have to constantly learn, so you got to put in the time. You got to get better at what you're doing. You're not going to be an expert overnight. No one actually is. In the book, what was it, Outliers? I think it's like 10,000 hours it takes to become an expert or to become super duper proficient at anything. Same thing when you're building an audience, when you're becoming an expert. Keep learning. Also, keep putting out content and don't expect results overnight. It's not how it works in any industry, and that's why a lot of salespeople or a lot of marketers will fail. Because they will jump from thing to thing to thing, thinking that this is the best thing, or maybe this wasn't right for me, when really they were on the cusp of becoming an expert or breaking through. It's going to take more time than what you think. That
being said, too, I mean, jumping from thing to thing, if you're, but you can also take steps up. You can build on what you've already learned. So you don't have to stay in the same job necessarily. You can take a different job as long as it's along the same vein. You are going to have to, there is no overnight success, and you're going to have to build up from coffee getter, whether that's literally or figuratively. That being said, from someone who, I've had blog posts go viral, and it doesn't matter. The traffic just goes back to normal. Once you ride that wave, it's helpful. There's things you can do to take advantage of that, but the bottom line is you just have to keep plugging along.
There is no substitute for hustle. There is no substitute for consistently putting that out there.
Yep. All right. Well, we appreciate you guys listening, and if you enjoyed what you heard, make sure that you subscribe to us on iTunes, and if you could rate us on iTunes as well, that really helps us out. It helps new people find the podcast, so we're trying to promote that a little bit more. Like I had said earlier, if you're interested in being a guest on the podcast, if you go to pushpullsales.com, there is a form there that you can fill out and apply. You can also find all our social information there at Push Pull Sales on Twitter and Instagram, and our email address is there as well. We appreciate you guys listening. Take a chance to, take some time to check out our sponsor, Blinkist, pushpullsales.com/quick read. Anything else? Oh, thank you to bensound.com for our intro and outro music, of course. Yeah, and thanks to you guys for listening.
Yeah, we almost forgot him.
Yeah, we don't want to forget that. We'll
Yep.
get in trouble.
Yep,
All right.
absolutely.
As always, let us know if you have any feedback or any questions, and we will talk to you guys soon.
See ya.